Hello, my name is Fatima Job, and welcome to my podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about how corporates are actually the main culprit for environmental problems. So the name of my project is called Corporate versus the Environment. So this project is focused on addressing the role companies play in environmental issues like pollution, climate change, and global warming. So the goal is to demand stronger awareness when it comes to environmental laws and a more coherent legal structure to address the responsibility of corporations. So just a little background information on my topic. In recent years, the legal implications of corporate environmental responsibility have grown rapidly in light of global climate change, pollution, and biodiversity. So throughout my research, I found the statistics actually show that corporates are the biggest offenders when it comes to harming our environment. And now I found out that the fashion industry, the shipping industry, and the extractive industries, such as oil, mining, and gas industries, have heavily affected the earth. And in this podcast, I'm going to go into exactly how they have. Now, as for the legal side of this, we know that the US has laws regarding the environment, such as the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act sets federal standards for mobile sources of air pollution and their fuels. We also have the Natural Environmental Policy Act, which requires a federal agency to consider environmental impacts before making major decisions. So, for this project, I used I used two court cases, one of them being Michigan versus EPA, and the other one being Massachusetts versus also EPA. I also used about four academic articles that I will cite throughout the podcast once I get to the information, of course. And all of the facts that I say in here are backed by primary sources. When I first originally wanted to get into this topic, I thought that the biggest contenders for climate problems would be something like, just leaving on the light or trashing the environment, littering. And although those are very bad and nobody should do that, what really shocked me was how much of an issue industries were for our climate. I found out that big companies were the main problems for our issues. So I'm just going to go ahead and break down exactly how these industries are affecting our climate. Okay, so this one's going to sound shocking, but the fashion industry is actually a huge polluter. Now, the fashion industry may not seem like a major polluter, but it definitely is. A report from Nature Reviews Earth and Environment in 2020 explains all about this. It explains that the fashion industry generates approximately 10% of carbon emissions worldwide. Fast, fast fashion brands such as Shein, I think Shein's the perfect example for this. They produce clothes fast and cheap, and most of it goes straight to landfills. Workers in the workers for Shein, they endure unhealthy conditions as they work in unsafe working spaces and live in polluted environments. This has been controversial for a while now, but yeah. Um, the shipping industry also burns one of the worst fuels on the planet, known as bunker fuel. One peer-reviewed journal published on the Environmental Science Technology site in 2018 estimates that global shipping creates nearly 1 billion tons of CO2 annually. That roughly 3% of all emissions. That's roughly 3% of all emissions. And many ships discharge waste directly into the ocean, which ruins marine ecosystems. So this is just not only messing with just the ecosystems, but also animals' lives as well. Um, so communities that live near lots of ports suffer the most, though. People who live near ports, let's say for example in California, have higher rates of asthma and cancer, according to a 2017 article from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. So now let's shift to extractive industries. These industries dig deeply into the earth for fossil fuels and minerals. I found in this article titled Resource Extraction Understanding Global Change. Extractive industries reduce the nutrients levels in ecosystems and destroy habitats. So once again, you're also messing with the animals, lives. One of the most significant environmental law cases, Massachusetts versus EPA, was exactly about extractive industries. Massachusetts sued the Environmental Protection Agency for failing to regulate greenhouse gases from cars. The Supreme Court determined that greenhouse gases are pollutants and that the agency has traditional authority to regulate these pollutants under the Clean Air Act. This case was huge because it was the first opportunity to hold fossil fuel companies accountable. It was a reminder of the government's role in addressing climate change. Unfortunately, not all cases came down this way. For example, Michigan versus EPA in 2015. The Supreme Court invalidated an EPA rule that would have required power plants to slash toxic emissions. The decision of the court said that the EPA did not adequately take into account the costs to the industry before writing the rule. The court said that it is more important to consider how costly it is for companies than how toxic the pollution is for people. Basically, what is implied. And that rule delayed efforts to clean up coal plants and protect public health, which is not good. These cases show that the government can intervene. However, it is also very clear, especially in Michigan versus EPA, it's also very clear that these big businesses have power within the legal system. So as for the legal implications, generally speaking, corporations are required to obey environmental laws. These regulations revolve around pollution, waste, emissions, and habitat destruction. But here's where things get kind of complicated. Environmental laws often don't directly hold companies personally responsible for broader damage they cause, such as climate change or biodiversity loss. And this and that it is also the case with ECA. The legal system specifically doesn't single out the companies themselves and instead targets the government agencies. As we can see in Massachusetts versus EPA, the government was the one being sued for not acting and not the fossil fuel companies that were doing the polluting themselves. So this just creates a legal gap. As many environmental as many environmental harms are collective, long-term, and extend beyond borders. This makes it difficult to pin them on a single company or to prove direct responsibility. That's why legal experts and activists are pushing for a broader corporate liability. So, for example, I found out about the environmental tort law. The environmental tort law would allow individuals or communities to sue companies directly for the pollution or other environmental problems. I think that this is a good way to go because it's important that the companies themselves are the ones being held accountable, you know, not only the states, I guess. A 2021 study in the global environmental change found that one of the key reasons governments frequently don't make or enforce strong environmental laws is corporate lobbying and legal pressure. In other words, corporate power isn't just economic, but it is also legal and political. So, yeah, that's all I have to say regarding the information. I think it's pretty clear where I stand. I think that these companies need to be called out. I think that this is a very important topic to have, though, because our environment is so important, and it's important that our environment stays safe and healthy because, yeah, we live here, and it's important that we live in a safe, clean environment because how we live not only affects our well-being but also our health. It's not always just about how everything looks, I guess. Obviously, we want a clean, nice environment, but it also affects our health and also animals. So yeah, our environment is very important. It's important that we take care of our environment. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Bye.